Nobody expected a simple off-season golf event to send Indiana Fever fans into a frenzy. But that's exactly what happened the moment Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull walked onto the course wearing Fever gear and carrying Caitlin Clark's clubs. What should have been a quiet, charity-style outing suddenly turned into one of the most talked-about storylines of the entire off-season. Not because of anything dramatic or controversial happening on the green, but because the interaction between the three players told fans something the stat sheets never could. The chemistry between them is real, and that kind of connection is almost impossible to manufacture. When Sophie joked around with Clark, adjusting tees and giving her playful grief for shanking a shot, it didn't look like a polished PR moment. It looked like a group of teammates who actually enjoy each other, who trust each other, and who treat each other like more than co-workers. And when Lexie cheered Clark on after every swing, right before she nearly lost her footing trying to carry the bag down a slope, the moment instantly bounced around social media. Clips made their way onto every basketball Reddit thread, WNBA Twitter account, and fan compilation page before the event was even over. Fans weren't just reacting to the humor or the bloopers. They were reacting to how natural everything felt. In a league where on-court success is usually connected to how quickly players can build trust, the Fever found themselves showcasing something most teams spend years desperately trying to create. Caitlin Clark didn't look like a rookie superstar surrounded by teammates she barely knew. She looked like she was already in the middle of her second or third season with players who understood her cadence, her humor, and her presence. Sophie's sarcasm blended right into Caitlin's deadpan reactions, and Lexie's supportive energy made the trio look like they had been playing together since college. This is the exact type of intangible bond fans latch onto during the off-season, the kind that keeps people talking even months before the next tip-off. And that buzz only intensified because it wasn't scripted. It wasn't an interview, a media appearance, or a press run obligation. It was three players, away from the cameras that usually control the narrative, showing the type of camaraderie every coach wishes they could bottle and hand out during training camp. But what made the moment even more significant was the timing. The Fever had just finished a season full of flashes, stretches where the team looked like a future powerhouse, mixed with injuries, roster shakeups, and growing pains that derailed any consistent rhythm. Fans entered the off-season with 1,000 questions about what the team would look like next year, and suddenly the golf event provided a glimpse of something the franchise desperately needed: stability. Seeing Clark surrounded by two teammates who not only support her game but genuinely enjoy being around her sparked discussions that spread far beyond basketball circles. Podcasts started speculating about whether Sophie and Lexie were locks to return. Commentators used the clip to highlight the Fever's growing identity. Even neutral fans who barely watched the team last season shared posts saying they hoped this trio stayed together long-term. It was a rare moment when the off-court dynamic carried as much weight as any box score. And the detail that pushed the moment into unexpectedly important territory came from the reactions of the players themselves. None of them acted like they were performing for a camera. Sophie teased Clark for hesitating before a swing. Clark laughed and told Lexie not to break her driver. Lexie nearly toppled over laughing at her own mis-hit. These weren't teammates staying polite for media optics. These were teammates who genuinely function like a unit. They didn't have to build chemistry. They already had it. The Fever fanbase, which has grown dramatically since Clark arrived, immediately recognized what they were seeing. Every generation of basketball fans knows that championship-level teams aren't just built through highlight plays or superstar talent. They're built when players trust each other, enjoy each other, and communicate without needing to speak. That kind of foundation is priceless, and it's incredibly rare in a league where roster turnover and salary constraints can break teams apart before they ever find their rhythm. So when fans saw Sophie handing Clark a club like a seasoned caddy, Lexie hyping her up like the world's most enthusiastic assistant, and Clark smiling like someone who felt completely at ease with her teammates, it created a ripple effect across the WNBA ecosystem. Analysts started calling it a chemistry showcase. Fan editors turned it into YouTube compilations. Comment sections filled with one repeating sentiment: they better all be back next season. But that's where the excitement began to mix with uncertainty. As wholesome and entertaining as the event looked, it also raised the most pressing question of the entire off-season. Were these moments just a fun memory, or a preview of the Fever's future core? Because behind that viral chemistry was a truth that nobody could ignore. Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull weren't guaranteed to return to Indianapolis. Their futures weren't as secure as those light-hearted moments made them appear. And that's why this single golf event, of all things, became the spark for a much larger conversation. One that would pull fans into contract debates, CBA negotiations, free agency speculation, and the shifting power dynamics of the WNBA. The off-court chemistry between Sophie Cunningham, Lexie Hull, and Caitlin Clark may have sparked the conversation, but none of it would matter if Sophie and Lexie couldn't actually hoop at a level that impacts winning. And that's the part a lot of casual fans tend to overlook. They see the jokes, the golf bloopers, the viral clips, but they don't always understand why the Fever front office quietly treats Sophie and Lexie as far more than just good vibes players. These two bring a combination of skills, spacing, and basketball IQ that the Fever genuinely cannot afford to lose. Not in the middle of a rebuild, not when they have the league's most valuable young star, and definitely not when the entire franchise is trying to establish a long-term identity. Start with Lexie Hull. If you only look at her box score numbers, you might assume she's just a role player. But if you actually watch how she moves on the court, the way she navigates screens, reads space, and relocates without the ball, she's one of the most important connectors on the roster. Lexie is the kind of guard who does everything at game speed. She fights around picks, she sprints into space to open passing lanes, and she crashes the boards from angles defenders don't expect. Her energy is the type you can't coach, the type that disrupts opposing offenses and gives her own team extra possessions simply because she refuses to take a play off. And when she's hitting her jumper, which she can do from deep range, she becomes the exact kind of player Caitlin Clark thrives next to. Clark's entire playstyle is built around manipulating defenders. She pushes pace, collapses defenders, and generates open threes like it's nothing. But that only works when you have teammates who know where to be and how to move when the defense reacts. Lexie has that instinct. She doesn't need Clark to point or direct. She's already sprinting into the open corner or sliding behind the arc at the exact moment Clark creates the advantage. That's exactly why coaches refer to her as a glue piece. She binds the offensive system together without needing plays called for herself. Then there's Sophie Cunningham, who brings a completely different flavor of value. Where Lexie is kinetic energy, Sophie is controlled versatility. She's the kind of player who can slip into multiple roles depending on what the Fever need in a given matchup. She can shoot from deep, she can handle the ball in secondary actions, she can operate as a physical wing defender, and she can act as a floor spacer who keeps defenses honest. Her confidence, her edge, and her mentality bring something Indianapolis doesn't have a lot of: a veteran presence willing to take responsibility in tough moments. And that matters. When Clark is being face-guarded, blitzed, or pushed into uncomfortable spots, Sophie knows how to take pressure off her. She can grab the ball, initiate a possession, and create stability. She's also a player who refuses to shrink in big moments. Whether she's hitting a timely three or getting into a defender's chest to force a turnover, she's the type of wing who raises the floor of the entire team. Her shooting, especially, is the key piece the Fever can't afford to replace. In a league dominated by spacing, where paint attacks only work when shooters are respected, Sophie is one of the players defenses can't leave open. And that gravity gives Clark the room she needs to operate. Without that kind of spacing, Clark's impact drops, the offense slows down, and Indiana becomes predictable. Sophie prevents that. She stretches the court both horizontally and vertically, which is exactly what allows Clark to punish defenses with her deep-range pull-ups or her cross-court skips. What makes all of this more valuable is the Fever's true identity as a modern spacing and movement team. When you have Kelsey Mitchell slashing, Aaliyah Boston drawing doubles in the post, and Caitlin Clark orchestrating everything like a maestro, the wings become the engines that make everything possible. They're the ones who keep defenders rotating. They're the ones who create the lanes. They're the ones defenses have to think about before helping. Lexie and Sophie are not optional pieces. They're strategic assets. They are two wings who fit perfectly into the exact blueprint the Fever want to execute for the next decade. And players like that don't come around often. They don't just shoot. They shoot with timing. They don't just move. They move with purpose. They don't just play off the ball. They understand how to weaponize off-ball movement to amplify their star player. And that's why their futures suddenly matter more than ever. It's not just about depth. It's not about filling roster spots. It's about the Fever already having the rarest thing a franchise can hope for during a rebuild. Players who genuinely make their superstar better. Wings who actually complement their system. Teammates who are already in sync with the face of the franchise. And a trio that shows signs of becoming something much bigger if they stay together. Teams can spend years, sometimes entire eras, trying to find that combination. Indiana found it by accident, then saw proof of it during the golf event, and now faces the challenge of keeping that chemistry intact. Because in a league where one roster change can either elevate or derail a team's entire future, players like Lexie Hull and Sophie Cunningham aren't just pieces, they're leverage. They're momentum. They're the foundation of what the Fever can become if they manage to protect the core that fits perfectly around Caitlin Clark's evolving superstar engine. If there's one thing that set off a wave of speculation louder than any highlight, it was Sophie Cunningham's repeated, almost rehearsed answer every time someone asked about her future with the Indiana Fever. It depends on the CBA. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She didn't even hint at her personal preference. She just anchored everything to one looming factor, the upcoming collective bargaining agreement. And that single phrase instantly became the centerpiece of every conversation about free agency, roster stability, and the Fever's future. The fascinating part is that Sophie isn't the type of player who usually deals in vague or cautious statements. She's outspoken, energetic, confident. She cracks jokes on live TV, chirps opposing players, and doesn't shy away from saying exactly what she feels. That's why this sudden shift into a non-committal, polished answer raised eyebrows. When someone whose personality is built on transparency suddenly becomes guarded, people start asking questions. And those questions always circle back to the same uncertainty that's hanging over the entire league. What the next CBA will actually look like. Fans who aren't deep into the business side of the WNBA might hear CBA negotiations and think it's just routine paperwork. But this time it's different. The stakes are unusually high, and the conversations happening behind closed doors aren't just about salary caps or travel upgrades. They're about the entire structure of the league. Expansion, schedules, pay scales, revenue sharing, marketing deals, player rights, international commitments, off-season leagues. Everything is on the table, and that's exactly why players like Sophie refuse to speak in absolutes. There's a very real possibility that the CBA could reshape contract rules, introduce new negotiation deadlines, limit overseas play, or even alter how certain players are classified in free agency. And until those rules are locked in, nobody, not the players, not the teams, not even the agents, can predict how the next year is going to look. Sophie understands that. She knows that making any commitment before the ink is dry would be irresponsible from a career perspective, especially because she's finally built up a level of value that makes her a desirable target for multiple teams. When she talked about Clark being a generational talent and elevating everyone around her, she wasn't wrong. Playing next to Caitlin has increased Sophie's visibility, boosted her endorsement potential, and made her recognizable even to casual fans. And she knows the Fever are in a sweet spot, not a finished product, but a team with a real path to contention if they address their weak points and stay healthy. So from a competitive standpoint, Indianapolis is a great place to be. But the business side is always the wild card. During her interview, she mentioned the last CBA meeting was a couple of weeks prior, and she didn't sugarcoat anything. She made it clear the players were standing firm, that the talks weren't simple, and that things were still ongoing. That's player speak for. Nothing is settled yet, and everyone is preparing for multiple outcomes. It's the same reason she keeps repeating the same line about waiting on the CBA. Because until she knows what financial landscape she's negotiating in, she can't project her future. And there's another layer. The possibility of a lockout. Fans hate the word, teams fear it, and players try not to bring it up, but it's the elephant in the room. A failed negotiation could delay the season, compress free agency, or shift contract timelines. For someone like Sophie, who is establishing herself as a veteran voice and building the prime years of her career, uncertainty like that isn't something you want to gloss over. That's why her tone changes slightly every time she addresses the subject. She goes from playful to careful, from expressive to measured. It's not because she's hiding anything. It's because she's navigating a sensitive landscape where one misinterpreted comment can spark rumors she doesn't intend to start. What makes all of this even more interesting is the public's reaction. Every time Sophie gives that same answer, it gets clipped, posted, analyzed, and debated. Some fans see it as a sign she wants to explore her options. Others think she's just being smart and patient. Some think it's a coded message that she loves the Fever but won't commit until she's protected financially. In reality, it's probably a mix of all three. Sophie is loyal, but she's also strategic. She enjoys Indianapolis, but she's not going to lock herself into a situation blindly. She believes in her teammates, but she also understands the business side of sports more than people realize. And that's why her answer struck a nerve. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't some headline-grabbing reveal. It was a reminder that behind all the chemistry, humor, and team culture, there's a very real business at play. A business that determines careers, shapes rosters, and affects whether players like Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull are still standing next to Caitlin Clark 9 months from now, or wearing a different uniform entirely. If the CBA negotiations weren't already complicated enough, the emergence of new leagues circling around WNBA players like Sharks has only made everything messier. These leagues didn't pop up quietly. They launched themselves into the conversation with headlines about million-dollar contracts, celebrity investors, and promises to revolutionize women's basketball. Suddenly, players who never expected to have leverage beyond overseas play are facing offers, pitches, and possibilities that simply didn't exist 5 years ago. And right in the middle of that storm are names like Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull, trying to navigate what these new opportunities mean for their careers. Project B is the league that has generated the loudest buzz, and for good reason. It's marketed as the bold, aggressive alternative, an American-based league with powerful financial backers ready to throw serious money at players. We're talking multi-million-dollar deals, performance incentives, media exposure, and the kind of financial security that can completely change a player's life. But here's the part that makes the situation complicated. Project B isn't trying to build a balanced league. It's targeting a specific subset of players, established veterans nearing the latter stages of their careers who want to secure one final massive paycheck before retirement. Sophie's name isn't exactly at the top of that list, but the money is massive enough that no player can ignore it. So when she said, "If people are going to pay you multi-million-dollar deals, why wouldn't you consider it?" she wasn't being mysterious or dramatic. She was being rational. Players in the WNBA don't earn anywhere near what their NBA counterparts make. There's no $20 million contract waiting around the corner. There's no guarantee of long-term financial stability. For many players, a huge offer is the kind of opportunity you at least have to think about, even if your heart is loyal to your current team. But Project B isn't the only disruptor. Then there's Unrivaled, the league designed specifically for younger stars, up-and-coming players who want additional competition, a bigger platform, and more income without leaving the US during the offseason. Unrivaled already has several notable names attached to it, from rookies who want year-round development to rising stars who see the league as a way to elevate their profiles even further. And unlike some overseas leagues, Unrivaled is structured around marketing, branding, and visibility. It's not just about basketball, it's about building the next generation of stars. That's where things get particularly interesting for the Fever. Caitlin Clark, being one of the biggest names in women's basketball, will always attract attention from any league looking to make a statement. And while she's not expected to join Project B for obvious financial reasons, she's already set with endorsements, sponsorships, and long-term earning potential. Unrivaled is a different story. Its format, audience, and off-season timing make it far more compatible with someone in her position. And if Clark ever decided to participate, it would only amplify the spotlight on anyone associated with her. That spotlight is exactly why Sophie and Lexie's names keep floating around these conversations. Being Clark's teammates gives them visibility that extends far beyond what their stats might show. Brands care about association. Leagues care about association. Audiences care about association. If a league can bring in players who appear regularly with one of the most marketable athletes in the sport, that's a win. And that's the sort of dynamic that pushes front offices to think strategically, not just about the players themselves, but about the ripple effect they create. Where things get even more tangled is the timing. All of this is happening while the WNBA is negotiating a new CBA, meaning players are being courted by outside leagues at the exact same moment the future rules of their primary league are being decided. It's like trying to make a major financial decision while the value of the currency itself is shifting hour by hour. Contracts, salary caps, roster limits, off-season restrictions. Everything is in limbo, and every new league that enters the conversation adds another layer of uncertainty. And this is where conflicts of interest start to pop up. Some WNBA players hold executive roles in these new leagues. Some are part-time founders. Some are influencers, brand ambassadors, or early-stage investors. That means the same people who are fighting for a strong WNBA CBA are also connected to leagues that might directly compete with the WNBA calendar or talent pool. It's a delicate balance, one that requires players like Sophie and Lexie to choose their words very carefully whenever they're asked about their future. To fans, it might look like everything revolves around loyalty and chemistry. In reality, players are juggling career longevity, financial opportunity, personal branding, and the future structure of the sport. The WNBA is expanding, but so are the alternatives. The league is gaining momentum, but so are the challengers. And players in the middle of their careers, like Sophie, have to think about every angle before committing to anything. But here's the most important part. Despite all the noise, all the new leagues, and all the tempting offers, none of these opportunities hold the same weight in Indianapolis as one specific factor: how their choices affect Caitlin Clark and the Fever's ability to compete for a championship. Because at the end of the day, even the most lucrative outside opportunity won't outweigh the chance to be part of a rising powerhouse if the roster stays intact. For all the talk about CBA negotiations, new leagues, contract structures, and financial offers, there's one force inside the Fever organization that influences roster decisions more than any of those external factors: Caitlin Clark. And what makes her influence so powerful is that she doesn't have to say anything directly. She doesn't need to walk into the front office demanding specific teammates, and she doesn't need to publicly lobby for anyone to stay. Her presence alone shifts the weight of every decision the Fever make. Clark isn't just a talented rookie, she's the gravitational center of the franchise. She's the reason home games started selling out. She's the reason the Fever suddenly appeared in primetime national broadcasts. She's the reason the team saw a jump in merchandise sales, media attention, and overall league relevance. When a player carries that amount of visibility, their preferences matter, even if they don't explicitly voice them. Star power comes with leverage, and front offices understand that keeping their superstar comfortable, supported, and surrounded by complementary pieces is essential for long-term success. That's where Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull come in. They aren't just role players, they're part of the environment that allows Clark to thrive on and off the court. The chemistry fans saw at the golf event wasn't an isolated moment. It was a reflection of how these three interact behind the scenes, in practices, in film sessions, and during team travel. Sophie brings a fiery edge, a sarcastic humor, and a veteran steadiness that keeps the atmosphere light even during high-pressure stretches. Lexie brings positivity, hustle, and a willingness to do the less glamorous work that makes star players' lives easier. Clark values those qualities more than people realize. She came into the league carrying the weight of massive expectations, some realistic, some unfair. Every misstep, every missed shot, every off night became a headline. For a rookie experiencing that level of attention, having teammates who get her, who support her, and who aren't intimidated by the spotlight is priceless. Sophie and Lexie don't just play next to Clark, they absorb the pressure with her. They joke with her. They keep her loose. They make the grind feel lighter. That kind of environment isn't easy to replicate. And the Fever front office isn't blind to this. They understand that while talent wins games, chemistry wins seasons. Clark elevates everyone around her, but the right teammates elevate her in return. They also understand the optics of it all. When the franchise posts photos of the golf event with captions highlighting the best caddies, or resharing clips of the three laughing together, they aren't just posting content, they're reinforcing a narrative. A narrative that says, this group belongs together. This is the core. This is the identity we're building. It's a message to the fans, a message to the media, and maybe even a subtle message to the players themselves. Teams don't spotlight dynamics they plan to break apart. Teams don't push a trio's chemistry unless they intend to keep that trio intact. And in the case of Clark, Sophie, and Lexie, that chemistry isn't just surface level, it's functional. It translates on the court. When Clark drives, Sophie knows whether to drift left or lift higher on the arc. When Clark gets trapped, Lexie knows when to cut or when to flare out for an outlet. These small decisions aren't by accident. They come from trust and repetition. This is also why Clark's influence doesn't need to be loud. She doesn't have to campaign or make public statements. Her impact is in how the Fever perform when she shares the floor with players who read the game the way she does. Front offices watch those moments closely. They see when the offense clicks into high gear. They see when spacing improves. They see when the team's flow changes with certain lineups. It becomes obvious who helps the star shine and who might disrupt the rhythm. Even beyond basketball, Clark's growing national platform changes the calculus. Players who share space with her benefit from increased media coverage, endorsement potential, and social growth. And Sophie and Lexie have been very aware of that. They've leaned into it, not in a selfish way, but in a strategic, career-minded way. They wear Fever gear during public events. They show up at Clark's appearances. They tag each other in posts, appear in behind-the-scenes clips, and present themselves as part of a unified unit. That's how you build a brand within a team. And the Fever know that a strong collective brand around Clark not only helps the players, it helps the franchise. Every bit of chemistry that appears online strengthens the Fever's image. It brings fans closer. It creates continuity. And it reinforces the idea that this is a young team with personality, identity, and genuine camaraderie. Which makes the stakes even higher. If Sophie or Lexie were to leave, it wouldn't just be a roster change. It would disrupt the foundation the Fever have quietly been constructing around Clark. And when a franchise has a superstar whose presence can shape the direction of an entire league, preserving that foundation becomes a priority. Long before Caitlin Clark ever put on an Indiana Fever uniform, the franchise made something very clear. They wanted to build a team rooted in culture, character, and consistency. Not just raw talent. Not just flashy stats. Not just players who could make a highlight reel. The Fever's leadership, coaches, scouts, executives, were searching for something deeper. Players who understood how to sacrifice, how to communicate, how to prioritize the team above individual spotlight. And they were willing to build slowly, deliberately, and intentionally to get there. That's why the Fever invested so heavily in players like Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell. Both of them represent the same core values: accountability, work ethic, emotional intelligence, and resilience. Boston brings a grounded leadership far beyond her age. Mitchell brings an unselfish intensity that drives the locker room. These were not random acquisitions. They were the foundation of a locker room culture the Fever desperately wanted to build. But a foundation works only if the surrounding pieces fit. And that's where Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull became more than just basketball players. They became character anchors. Sophie brings a competitive fire that coaches love, but only works if it's paired with self-awareness and emotional maturity. She chirps, she jokes, she agitates defenders, and she plays with a level of confidence that raises the temperature of any game. But underneath that energy is someone who values structure, discipline, and accountability. She's the type who will stay after practice to help a rookie work on a defensive rotation, and the type who owns her mistakes without drama. That combination, high energy, low ego, is rare in professional sports, and it's exactly the type of personality that thrives inside a culture-first organization. Lexie Hull fits the blueprint in a completely different way. She's quiet, composed, and relentlessly consistent. She treats the game with a level of intention that mirrors the Fever's internal values. She prepares meticulously, studies film, and carries herself like someone who wants to master the little details before thinking about the big picture. Teammates trust her because she doesn't cut corners. Coaches trust her because she listens, adjusts, and executes. And fans draw to her because she plays with sincerity. No theatrics, no ego, just pure commitment to the team. This is exactly why Stephanie White's shopping cart analogy, the idea that the Fever want players who put the cart back instead of leaving it in the parking lot, applies perfectly here. The organization is prioritizing players who do the right thing even when nobody is looking. That's not a common trait in pro sports where personal branding, stats, and visibility can overshadow teamwork. But the Fever aren't looking for players who want to be stars. They're looking for players who want to build something meaningful. And Sophie and Lexie embody that. You can see it in the way they interact during games. They're the ones calming teammates after a bad possession. They're the ones stepping in during a heated moment to keep the group focused. They're the ones celebrating the small plays, the extra pass, the drawn charge, the smart rotation. Those habits create culture. They build trust. They set the standard for everyone around them. And they transform a group of individuals into a team with direction. That's why the golf event hits so differently. Fans didn't just see three players having fun. They saw three personalities who genuinely complement each other. Sophie brings the comedic chaos, Lexie brings the stability, and Clark brings the superstar gravitational pull that ties everything together. It's the exact blend you want in a team trying to rise from mediocrity to championship contention. And here's where things get even more significant. Culture isn't something you can replace through free agency. You can replace skills. You can replace shooting. You can replace height, speed, defense, playmaking. But you can't replace chemistry. You can't manufacture trust. You can't buy into a culture overnight. It takes years to build, and seconds to destroy. That's why players like Sophie and Lexie become far more valuable than their stats suggest. Their presence stabilizes the team. Their personalities complement the franchise star. Their buy-in enhances the coaching staff's message. Their willingness to play roles, not chase them, creates an environment where growth is possible. And the Fever know it. They've already watched what happens when the roster loses balance. They saw how chemistry was disrupted last season when injuries piled up and lineups shifted constantly. They saw how a lack of continuity affected spacing, momentum, and communication. So now, in an off-season where the organization is trying to solidify itself as a rising contender, the last thing they want to do is break apart the cultural backbone they've spent years assembling. If Sophie or Lexie walked away, the gap wouldn't be purely basketball, it would be cultural. It would affect practices, film sessions, travel days, team meetings, locker room dynamics. It would affect Clark, Mitchell, and Boston. It would affect the coaching staff's ability to maintain the identity they're still shaping. And that's the kind of loss that can't be patched with a mid-level signing or an unproven rookie. That's why the Fever don't see Sophie and Lexie as optional pieces. They see them as essential. And as long as the franchise continues prioritizing culture as highly as talent, the value of keeping this trio intact becomes more than strategic. It becomes necessary. For all the feel-good moments, all the chemistry clips, and all the cultural alignment between Sophie, Lexie, and the Fever, the reality is this. Professional basketball is still a business. And in that business, the biggest decisions don't happen on the court or in front of cameras. They happen in contracts, negotiations, and behind-the-scenes strategy sessions that determine where players will be, how they'll be valued, and what opportunities they're willing to fight for. That's why this off-season feels heavier than usual for Indiana. It's not just about keeping a roster intact. It's about navigating a shifting financial landscape that can either secure the Fever's core or scramble it entirely. Lexie Hull's situation is complicated but straightforward on paper. She's a restricted free agent. That means any team can make her an offer, but the Fever have the right to match it. In simpler terms, Indiana controls her future unless another team throws out a massive, unexpected deal that forces the Fever into a hard choice. But here's the catch. WNBA teams rarely hand out absurd contracts to role players unless they see something uniquely valuable in them. And for Lexie, that unique value is her fit. Her movement, her off-ball instincts, her defensive versatility. They're tailor-made for a system built around Caitlin Clark's pace and Aaliyah Boston's interior control. Another team might try to poach her, but would they be able to offer her a situation where she thrives more than she does next to Clark? Probably not. And front offices know that. They aren't just scouting talent, they're scouting context. They evaluate whether a player will succeed in that specific system, with that specific star, and in that specific environment. That's why nearly everyone believes Lexie will be back unless a team decides to offer her a salary that completely breaks the market. And let's be honest, Indiana would almost certainly match it anyway, because they understand exactly what they have. Sophie Cunningham's situation is less predictable. She's not restricted, she's not locked in, and she's not tied down by any immediate contractual barriers. Her future truly does hinge on how the new CBA restructures the league. And here's why that's such a massive wild card. The The CBA could completely change how teams spend their money. It could raise caps. It could introduce new luxury tax rules. It could change overseas commitments. It could alter player movement timelines. It might encourage teams to invest more heavily in mid-tier veterans, or it might reward them for building around younger players with lower salaries. Sophie falls right into the category of players whose value is determined by how the league decides to evolve. She's not a max contract superstar, but she's not a minimum salary bench piece either. She sits in the middle, a zone that could either expand under a new CBA or shrink if teams prioritize budget flexibility. That's why her answers have been so careful. It's not about desire. It's about timing. Committing too early could cost her financially. Committing too late could cost her stability. And then there's the looming threat that nobody wants to talk about but everyone is quietly preparing for: a potential lockout. If the players and the league can't reach an agreement, the entire season could be delayed or even cancelled. That scenario would rip open the market, shift timelines, freeze contract offers, and throw free agency into complete chaos. For veterans like Sophie, a lockout is more than an inconvenience, it's a career disruption. Even if the season doesn't get cancelled, a rushed or contentious negotiation could still impact how teams structure their offers. If the cap changes, the Fever might have less flexibility, or more. If roster rules shift, teams might need more positional versatility, something Sophie excels in. Every detail matters, and none of those details are finalized yet. But the most fascinating part is how both players are weighing something beyond money: leverage. Sophie knows her value has increased because of her role next to Caitlin Clark. She's more visible. She's more marketable. Her social numbers climbed. Her Q rating improved. Endorsements became easier to secure. Even her recognition from non-WNBA fans skyrocketed. That kind of platform matters when you negotiate a new contract. It gives players confidence that they can push for a larger role or a higher salary without fearing they'll be overlooked. Lexie is in a similar position, but for a different reason. She's young, developing, and connected to a rising franchise. Teams want players with upside, and players want systems that amplify them. She knows Indianapolis gives her both. She also knows that the Fever, with Clark as their engine, are positioned to have more nationally televised games and more mainstream attention than almost any team in the league. That visibility increases her earning potential through sponsorships and off-court opportunities, benefits that are rarely factored into contract math but carry enormous long-term value. When you look at the full picture, it becomes clear why fans, analysts, and insiders all believe Sophie and Lexie will return despite the chaos. The Fever need them, Clark wants them, and the system elevates them. But until the CBA is finalized, everything remains suspended in uncertainty. And that uncertainty has created one of the most delicate, high-stakes off-seasons the Fever have faced in years. The WNBA off-season always comes with its dose of mystery, but this year feels different. It feels heavier. It feels like every decision, every interview, every rumor, every league announcement carries a ripple effect that could shape not just the Fever's roster, but the entire trajectory of their rebuild. And with the draft lottery approaching and the league still operating as if business will move forward normally, the Fever find themselves in a strangely calm but undeniably fragile moment. Everything looks stable on the outside, but everyone knows how quickly things can shift if the CBA negotiations take an unexpected turn. Still, the signs are pointing toward optimism. For one, the league continuing its plans for the draft lottery on November 23rd is a strong indicator that the season remains very much in sight. Organizations don't hold draft lotteries if they're expecting the calendar to collapse. They don't schedule future events if they believe a lockout is imminent. Those kinds of structural signals matter. Teams look for patterns like this when assessing how aggressive they should be in their off-season planning. And the Fever, more than most teams, have a reason to stay forward-thinking. They know what they have. They know what they almost achieved when healthy. And they know how rare it is for a young team, led by a generational rookie, a defensive anchor, and one of the league's most reliable scorers, to find chemistry this fast. That kind of foundation doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen often. Continuity is the path to contention for teams like Indiana, not massive roster overhauls. That's why the Fever's front office has gone out of its way to publicly reinforce the closeness of the group. posting photos of the best caddies, amplifying the team's off-season moments together, keeping fans emotionally tied to the trio. It isn't coincidence. It's narrative shaping. Smart teams understand that strengthening a public perception of unity gives them leverage when negotiating contracts. Players want to be part of environments that feel connected. Fans want to believe the team they're supporting isn't just competitive, but cohesive. And organizations want the league, the media, and the players involved to understand that the group they have is worth keeping intact. The Fever also know that losing Sophie or Lexie wouldn't simply be losing a shooter or a wing. It would be losing continuity. Losing chemistry. Losing the unspoken rhythm they've been quietly building around Clark's skill set. It would force them to bring in new players who must learn Clark's timing, Boston's spacing, Kelsey Mitchell's tendencies, and the entire system that has taken a year to install. Rebuilding that takes time, and the Fever aren't in a rebuild from scratch phase anymore. They're in a tighten the screws and push forward phase. This is why their approach to the off-season feels almost like controlled patience. They're not rushing. They're not panicking. They're not leaking dramatic rumors or hinting at seismic changes. They're waiting for the CBA to finalize because they understand that once the rules are set, they'll be in a strong position to make the moves that keep their core together. And that brings us to the biggest reason fans should expect Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull to return. The Fever have every tool they need to retain both players unless something extremely unusual happens. Lexie's restricted status means Indiana simply needs to match whatever offer comes her way. Sophie's market value is high, but not so high that multiple teams will start a bidding war. And both players have made subtle but consistent comments that show they understand the value of staying exactly where they are. Lexie has the perfect system to grow in. Sophie has a role that fits her game and her personality. Both of them gain visibility and brand elevation by playing next to Clark. And the Fever's rising national relevance means these players' careers expand far beyond on-court performance. Media exposure, endorsement chances, and social reach all increase dramatically in Indiana's current environment. And to be completely honest, that matters. Professional athletes consider visibility just as much as salary. A role on a team that's constantly on national TV is worth more than a slightly larger contract on a team that barely airs outside regional markets. Even if players don't say it outright, they know the difference it makes when millions of people watch their games and clips. If the CBA is finalized without a lockout, if the structure doesn't erase Indiana's financial ability to keep them, and if everything proceeds as the league's schedule suggests, the Fever will almost certainly bring Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull back. Not because of hype. Not because of off-court moments. But because the chemistry is real, the basketball value is undeniable, and the franchise knows they have something special that shouldn't be disrupted. The only real threat is the CBA. And until the ink dries, every player, coach, and front office member in the league is holding their breath. But as it stands now, the Fever's future looks bright, and the core that fans have grown to love appears poised to return, stronger than ever, with one goal in mind: turning the flashes of last season into a true championship push. When you look back at everything that's happened this offseason, the viral golf moment, the behind-the-scenes interviews, the whispers about new leagues, the steady pulse of the CBA negotiations, it becomes clear that the future of the Indiana Fever isn't just about talent. It's about timing, chemistry, trust, and the ability to hold onto the pieces that make this team more than the sum of its parts. Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull aren't just role players hoping to survive free agency. They're vital threads in a fabric the Fever have spent years trying to stitch together. They bring the shooting, the spacing, the defensive grit, and the emotional intelligence that championship teams are built on. They amplify Caitlin Clark's strengths. They reinforce Aaliyah Boston's stability. They strengthen Kelsey Mitchell's scoring power by making the entire system flow smoother. They represent the exact type of personality and work ethic the Fever have said, over and over, they want at the heart of their culture. And while the CBA negotiations cast a shadow over every decision, the truth is this: all signs point toward a future where this trio stays together. The rookies matured. The veterans stepped forward. The momentum built. And Indiana, for the first time in years, felt like a franchise on the brink of something special. That kind of energy doesn't just disappear. It builds. It grows. It pulls players back instead of pushing them away. But there's one more truth that matters just as much. Teams like the Fever don't rise because of talent alone. They rise because their fans push them upward. And right now, this channel, your channel, is trying to grow alongside the players and the storylines we talk about. So if you made it to this point, if you care about the Fever, the WNBA, or the future of this core, then here's how you can genuinely help this channel grow and keep covering stories like this in deeper, smarter, more technical detail. If you enjoyed this breakdown and you want more long-form, research-driven content about the Indiana Fever, Caitlin Clark, and the evolving landscape of women's basketball, then subscribe to the channel. It tells YouTube's algorithm that this content matters, which helps push future videos to more fans who want coverage the mainstream outlets simply aren't providing. Like the video. Engagement signals help the system understand that viewers find value here. Even a single like boosts the performance of the next upload. Drop a comment below. Tell me whether you think Sophie and Lexie are coming back. Tell me what lineup you want to see next season. Or just share your thoughts on the CBA drama. Every comment, no matter how short, helps YouTube promote the video to new viewers and grow this community. This channel is still small, but with your support, it can become one of the most in-depth, high-retention platforms covering the WNBA with the nuance, respect, and detail it deserves. So if you want more content like this, hit subscribe, smash that like, leave a comment, and help shape what we break down next. We're just getting started.